Tonight, our journey takes us to a quiet night in a cornfield in Caledonia, New York. It is a story about a girl who became a ghost for 35 years. A girl who wore the Florida sun on her skin, but died in the frozen mud of the North. For decades, she was a Jane Doe, a file on a dusty shelf, a face sketched in charcoal. But the dead don't stay quiet forever. Sometimes it just takes the right person to listen. This is the story of the girl with the heart key. This is the story of Tammy Jo Alexander. The date is November 10th, 1979. The morning broke gray and miserable over Livingston County, New York. It had rained hard the night before, a freezing torrential downpour that turned the dirt roads into sludge. Barry Bench, a local farmer, was walking his land just off US Route 20. Route 20 is a lonely stretch of highway. It cuts through the belly of New York State, flanked by fields that go on for miles. By November, the corn is harvested. The stalks are brown, broken, and dead. It's a monochrome world. But as Barry walked the edge of the field, he saw a splash of color that stopped him in his tracks. Red, bright, synthetic red. He stepped off the road into the furrowed earth. There, lying face down in the mud, was a girl. She was small, maybe 5'3". She was wearing a red nylon windbreaker that looked far too thin for the weather. Underneath, she had on a plaid button-down shirt, corduroy pants, and knee socks. She wasn't moving. Barry didn't touch her. He knew what he was looking at. He turned around and called the Livingston County Sheriff. Deputy Robert John was the first on the scene. As he approached the body, the horror of what had happened to this girl became clinically, brutally clear. She hadn't just been dumped there. She had been hunted. The evidence in the mud told a story of the final seconds of her life. There was a large pool of blood by the roadside. This is where she was shot the first time, over the right eye, a catastrophic wound. But the killer wasn't finished. The drag marks were deep and frantic. The killer had grabbed her by the belt loops and dragged her body from the road, through the mud, and into the cornstalks to hide her. And then, standing over her broken body, he fired again. A second shot, directly into her back. This was an execution. It was personal. It was angry. As the coroner and the detectives began the grim work of processing the scene, they started to notice things that didn't make sense. First, her face. Despite the violence, they could see she was pretty. Feathered hair, well cared for teeth. But her skin, she had distinct sharp tan lines. Halter top lines, bikini lines. In upstate New York in November, the sky is gray for weeks at a time. Nobody has a tan like that. She looked like she had just walked off a beach in Daytona. They searched her pockets. They were looking for a driver's license, a note, a bus ticket, anything. They found nothing. No wallet, no ID. But they did find something else. Something that would become the symbol of this case for the next 3 decades. Clipped to her front belt loop were 2 keychains. The first was a silver heart, but it wasn't a whole heart. It had a jagged key-shaped silhouette cut out of the center. The second keychain was the key that fit it. He holds the key to my heart. That's what those keychains usually say. It's a teenage trinket, a promise between high school sweethearts. But here, in the mud, the promise was broken. She had the heart, she had the key, and she was all alone. The sheriff's department had a body. They had a murder weapon, a .38 caliber handgun. They had a distinct red jacket. They assumed they would identify her within 24 hours. A teenager doesn't just disappear without a phone ringing somewhere. They were wrong. 24 hours turned into a week. A week turned into a month. And the girl in the cornfield became Cali Doe. The investigation that followed was exhaustive. It was led by men who took this case personally. Sheriff John York, who was a deputy at the time, would eventually keep a photo of Cali Doe on his desk every single day of his career. He swore he wouldn't retire until she had a name. Let's look at the evidence they had because it is baffling. The jacket. The red windbreaker she is wearing became the primary lead. It wasn't something you could buy at Sears. The label read, Auto Sports Products Inc. Detectives tracked down the manufacturer. They learned that the specific jacket was a promotional item. It was essentially swag. It was handed out at auto races and car shows in the late 70s. This was a massive clue. Did she hang out at drag strips? Was her father a mechanic? Or was the jacket not hers? It was a men's size medium. It was oversized on her small frame. The leading theory was that she was cold, and someone, perhaps the killer, gave it to her to wear. This pointed toward a specific type of suspect, a man involved in racing, cars, or who frequented tracks in the Northeast or the South. Next, the pollen. When traditional detective work hit a wall, they turned to science. They sent her clothing to a forensic botanist. This is where the geography of the crime shifted dramatically. The botanist found microscopic grains of pollen trapped in the fabric of her corduroys. They identified it as casuarina, common name, Australian pine. Habitat. In North America, it is found almost exclusively in Florida and parts of the extreme Southwest. Australian pine cannot survive in New York winter. It dies in the frost. The pollen on her pants proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that this girl had been walking through Florida pine groves very recently. So now they had a profile, a teenager, 15 to 19 years old, a runaway, likely from Florida, hitchhiking north. But why was no one looking for her? To understand why Cali Doe sat in a morgue for 35 years, we have to understand the era. 1979. This was the height of the runaway epidemic. Teenagers were hitting the highways in record numbers. They were fleeing broken homes, chasing the fading tail of the hippie movement, or just looking for something different. Police departments were overwhelmed. There was no internet, no central database. If a girl ran away from a trailer park in Florida and the local cops didn't fax her photo to a station in New York, the connection was never made. The police developed a theory. They called her a traveler, and in the harsh language of 1979 police work, they suspected she might have been a blot lizard, a sex worker soliciting truckers at rest stops. They theorized she hopped into a semi-truck in Florida. The driver brought her north. Maybe she wanted to get out at Rochester. Maybe he wanted more than she was willing to give. An argument on the side of the road, a gun drawn, 2 shots, and the truck disappears into the night. It was a plausible theory. It explained the distance. It explained the lack of local witnesses, but it didn't feel right to everyone. The girl in the cornfield was well nourished. Her teeth were perfect. No cavities, no dental work needed. She was clean. She didn't have the physical markers of someone who had been living hard on the streets for years. She looked like someone's daughter who had just left home. They brought in artists. They reconstructed her face from the skull. They drew her with that feathered Farrah Fawcett hair. They put the pictures in newspapers from Miami to Buffalo. Do you know this girl? The headlines asked. Thousands of tips came in. She looks like my neighbor. She looks like a girl I saw at a diner. Every lead was chased. Every lead was a dead end. Sheriff York chased them all. He flew to Texas. He flew to Florida. He checked the dental records of hundreds of missing girls. None of them matched. By the mid-1980s, the case was cold. The girl was buried in Greenmount Cemetery in Dansville, New York. Her headstone read simply, "Unidentified girl." The community adopted her. People who never knew her brought flowers on Christmas. They cleaned the snow off her grave. She became Caledonia's daughter. But 1,200 miles away, A family was living a lie. Let's leave the cold cornfield for a moment and go south to Brooksville, Florida. Tammy Jo Alexander was born in Atlanta in 1963, but she grew up in the humid heat of Brooksville. Her life was not easy. Her friends described her as a firecracker, vivacious, fun, but deeply troubled. She loved rock and roll. She smoked cigarettes. She had a laugh that could fill a room. But inside her house, things were chaotic. Her mother was struggling with prescription drug issues and severe mood swings. Her father wasn't in the picture. Tammy Jo often acted as the adult, but she was just a child. She started running away when she was young, sometimes for a night, sometimes for a week. She would crash with friends. She would hitchhike to the beach. To her half-sister Pamela Dyson, this was just Tammy being Tammy. Pamela was older. She had moved out. She worried, but she thought Tammy was tough. In early 1979, Tammy Jo left again. She told friends she was going off to find her biological father, or maybe she was going to California to be a model. She had big dreams and no money. Months passed. Pamela called her mother. "Have you heard from Tammy?" Her mother would say, "No, she's off living her life. She'll call when she wants something." This is the tragedy that allowed the killer to get away. The runaway label, the assumption that she was safe, just stubborn. Tammy's mother never filed a missing persons report. Not in 1979, not in 1980, never. Pamela assumed her mother had filed one. The police in Florida had no record of Tammy Jo Alexander existing. So, when Sheriff York sent those teletypes to Florida describing a girl with a heart necklace, the Hernando County Sheriff's Office looked at their files, saw no missing Tammy Jo, and threw the teletype in the trash. For 35 years, Tammy Jo Alexander didn't exist. She was just a memory to her sister and a Jane Doe to the police. Fast forward to 2014. Sheriff York had retired. The file was passed to a new generation of detectives, but the world had changed. The internet had given birth to a new kind of detective, the web sleuth. Laurel Nowell was a high school friend of Tammy Jo's. She was now a grown woman living in Arizona. She was nostalgic. She started looking for her old friend online. She wanted to reconnect. She searched Facebook, MySpace, Ancestry.com. Nothing. It was as if Tammy Jo had walked off the edge of the earth in 1979. Laurel got a sinking feeling in her gut, a feeling she couldn't shake. She started reaching out to other friends from Brooksville. "Has anyone seen Tammy Jo?" The answer was always the same. No, not since high school. Laurel did something brave. She contacted the Hernando County Sheriff's Office in Florida. She told them, "I haven't seen my friend in 35 years. I think something happened to her." The police were skeptical. A missing person from 1979 with no family report? But Laurel pushed. And finally, in August 2014, a missing persons report was filed for Tammy Jo Alexander. This report entered the national database, nameless. At the same time, in California, a man named Carl Koppelman was sitting at his computer. Carl is an accountant by trade, but an artist and sleuth by passion. He moderates online forums for the unidentified. He spends his nights drawing the faces of the dead, hoping to give them names. Carl saw the new entry for Tammy Jo Alexander. He saw her high school photo, the feathered hair, the high cheekbones, the spacing of her eyes. He paused. He opened another window on his computer. He pulled up the sketch of the Caledonia Jane Doe, Cali Doe. He put the photos side by side. The hair, the eyes, the timeline. Tammy Jo vanished in early 1979. Cali Doe was found in November 1979. Tammy Jo was from Florida. Cali Doe had Florida pollen on her pants. Carl felt the chill that every investigator chases. He picked up the phone and called the Livingston County Sheriff's Office. "I think I found her," he said. The police moved fast. They contacted Pamela Dyson, Tammy Jo's sister. They asked Pamela if Tammy Jo ever owned a red windbreaker, and Pamela just said she didn't know. Then they pressed her about jewelry, and after pausing for a bit, she finally mentioned that Tammy Jo had a keychain, a silver heart, something she bought for herself. The detectives asked Pamela for a DNA sample, and on January 26, 2015, the lab results came back. The mitochondrial DNA from the body in the cornfield was a perfect match to Pamela Dyson. Cali Doe is gone. Tammy Jo Alexander had been found. It was a moment of triumph, but also of devastating sadness. Pamela had to learn that her sister hadn't ignored her for 35 years. She hadn't built a new life. She had been murdered before she was even old enough to vote. Sheriff York, now retired, stood at the press conference. He wept openly. He had kept his promise. Carl felt the chill that every investigator chases. He picked up the phone and called the Livingston County Sheriff's Office. "I think I found her," he said. The police moved fast. They contacted Pamela Dyson, Tammy Jo's sister. They asked Pamela if Tammy Jo ever owned a red windbreaker, and Pamela just said she didn't know. Then they pressed her about jewelry, and after pausing for a bit, she finally mentioned that Tammy Jo had a keychain, a silver heart, something she bought for herself. The detectives asked Pamela for a DNA sample, and on January 26, 2015, the lab results came back. The mitochondrial DNA from the body in the cornfield was a perfect match to Pamela Dyson. Cali Doe is gone. Tammy Jo Alexander had been found. It was a moment of triumph, but also of devastating sadness. Pamela had to learn that her sister hadn't ignored her for 35 years. She hadn't built a new life. She had been murdered before she was even old enough to vote. Sheriff York, now retired, stood at the press conference. He wept openly. He had kept his promise. We know who she is, but the question that keeps me awake, and the question that keeps the Livingston County Sheriff up at night, is who killed her? Now that we have her movements, the timeline is terrifying. Tammy Jo left Florida in early 1979. She died in November. That is a gap of nearly 6 months. Where was she? Did she hitchhike straight to New York and live there? Did she bounce around the country? Or was she held captive? The pollen suggests she was in the South shortly before she died. This implies a rapid transit, a long drive. There are 3 main theories. Theory number 1, the serial killer. In 1979, the highways of America were hunting grounds. Several serial killers were active in the Northeast. One name comes up over and over again, Christopher Wilder. They called him the Beauty Queen Killer. Wilder was a wealthy race car driver. He was handsome. He was charming. He lured young, pretty teenage girls into his car with promises of modeling gigs. Remember the jacket? Auto sports products. A racing promotional jacket. Wilder was deeply embedded in the racing scene. He traveled the country for races. He was in New York. He was in Florida. Tammy Jo fit his victim profile perfectly. Petite, pretty, looking for a way out. Did she meet him at a track in Florida? Did he promise her a modeling career in New York? Did he give her that jacket to keep her warm on the long drive north? Wilder died in a shootout with police in 1984. He took his secrets to the grave, but the circumstantial evidence, the jacket, the racing connection, the geography, is compelling. Theory number 2, the prison boyfriend. There is a rumor buried deep in the case files that Tammy Jo might have gone to New York to visit a boyfriend who was incarcerated. This would explain why she was in such a remote area. But despite decades of searching, no boyfriend has ever been identified. No visitation logs match her name. Was this just a story she told to cover her tracks? Theory number 3, the stranger. This is the most terrifying option. She was hitchhiking on a Route 20. A local man picked her up, a man who looked normal, a farmer, a delivery driver, a father. Something went wrong, a rejection, a flash of anger. He killed her, dumped her in a field he knew was secluded, and drove home to dinner. If this is true, the killer could still be alive. He could be in his 60s or 70s. He could be living in Caledonia right now, driving past that cornfield every day, looking at the spot where he left her. Tammy Jo Alexander is buried under her own name now. Her sister Pamela finally got to say goodbye. The Jane Doe file is closed, but the murder file is open. I want you to picture the scene one last time. The rain, the mud, the red jacket, and those keychains, the heart, and the key. If Tammy Jo bought them for herself, they were a symbol of her independence. She held the key to her own heart. But if they were a gift, if they were a token from a boyfriend or a man she met on the road, then the symbolism changes. When the police found her, she had the heart and the key attached to her belt. But keychains like that usually come in 2 sets. One person keeps the heart, the other keeps the key that fits it. Did the killer take the other set? Does he still have it? Is there a man out there, an old man now, who has a silver heart hidden in a jewelry box? A trophy from the girl in the cornfield? We know her name, we know her face. But until the one who pulled the trigger is found, the story remains unfinished. Tonight, the cornfield in Caledonia lies in silence, yet beneath that quiet, the truth waits, buried, patient, and ready to be unearthed.